This week on the Wheelhouse. Bye, Biden. The new race for the White House and what this means for November. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is a special edition of the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Live from the Connecticut Public Studios here in Hartford. We are streaming on YouTube as well, so there's a video component today, but streaming on the radio as we do each week. But coming to you differently this week on a Monday, because another week, another major shakeup in the presidential race. For weeks, President Joe Biden, he's faced increasing pressure from fellow Democrats to step aside. And on Sunday, he finally heeded those calls. All eyes now on Vice President Kamala Harris. Biden's endorsed her for the job, and so have other top Democrats. But her nomination isn't exactly guaranteed. At August Democratic National Convention, delegates will have to throw their support behind Harris. But there are several other Democrats being floated as possible contenders. Talk about that. Later this hour, we're going to hear from U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal about yesterday's historic news. But first, a powerhouse panel here to walk me and you through what Biden's decision will mean for the coming months. Streaming live on YouTube today, search at Connecticut Public to watch the show. And, of course, we are on the radio. I want to know, how are you feeling about Biden's exit? What questions do you have? Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. I'd like to introduce our powerhouse panels of guests. To my right here in studio, Mark Pazniokis, Capitol Bureau Chief, Connecticut Mirror.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Good to see that you made it here back from Milwaukee last week.
Yes, thank you.
And speaking of the convention, covering it was Lisa Hagan for Connecticut Public and the CT Mirror. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Hey, good to be back with you.
And so good to talk with you this morning. Thank you so much for your support and coming on the show. And the professor, Dr. Bilal Sekou, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. How you doing, Bilal? Bilal's there somewhere.
Good morning, Frank.
I see him. He looks great. There he is. Okay. Of course, we're seeing him because we are streaming on youtube.com/Connecticut Public. Good morning, Bilal.
Good morning. How are you? And go Hawks.
Go Hawks. We could even say that right now. It's been such an irregular time in America, but Dr. Bilal Sekou saying go Hawks just brings you right back to reality here. Mark, you get the first question. 2 weekends in a row of breaking news. I thought about this the other day. Is like, if you look at how ESPN does things nowadays with those graphics during the sports games, like in the fourth quarter of an NFL game, one team's leading and it's like 90% likely that they might finish out strong, like when the former president was the victim of an assassination attempt last week. And then a week later, he has what many people are calling a tough speech at the national convention. And then you have a younger candidate on the Democratic side being named, and maybe that graphic is turning a little bit. So much things happening. We use the word unprecedented a lot. But is it fair to say this election cycle is, I guess, really unprecedented?
Certainly in my lifetime, and my lifetime is now getting to be fairly lengthy as far as covering politics.
I know, I'm sorry. We talked too much about age.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. I'm fine. Yes, you cannot understate how volatile this time is. Even prior to the assassination attempt on President Trump, this country was in a very, very precarious place regarding its politics, incredible, deep divisions. Then an assassination attempt, the emotion of that. You had an 81-year-old president who there was a lot of doubts about his ability to win, and even if he could win, to serve a full second term when he would have exited at the age of 86. And now we have him exiting it dramatically and the coalescing around Kamala Harris, his vice president.
The term octogenarian, really wasn't something that we used in our lexicon for a while, and then it kind of we kind of adopted it again because President Joe Biden was one of the words that you used last time that we talked about. So like people are talking about age more, but this comes down on a Sunday, and I think it was at like 1:45 or something like that. Shock to many Americans, I would imagine. Was it similarly shocking to you?
No, I can't say it was a shock. I mean, the timing, you never know when it's going to happen. And in fact, you had reached out to me in Milwaukee to raise the possibility of this show today. So
yeah, let's break down the fourth wall.
Yeah, so I can't say it was.
Or at least were you? What did it force you to break away and have to do a story? Did you have to tell the wife, "Hey, we got to leave a lunch" or something like that? Was there at least a little surprise at the timing?
Yes, I actually left Milwaukee with notes for yet another story about the Republican Party, and I set that aside, and I don't know when I'll quite get back to that. But sure, I think there's a lot of scrambling in the worlds of journalism and politics as people try to quickly reach out to folks, and that's what Lisa and I did yesterday, and we were able to reach a fair number of Democrats fairly quickly. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, Lisa, give me your immediate reaction to the news and at least how you thought, not necessarily how you thought, but at least what the Democrats were saying as you had reached out to them.
Yeah, it was increasingly becoming a not if, but when Biden would drop out. I think we were all fairly surprised on a Sunday afternoon. I think we were all hoping for a normal news cycle for once. But it was feeling pretty inevitable. But yeah, as Mark said, I mean, people were ready to talk about Biden dropping out. I think everyone was, again, preparing for it. We weren't sure if he was going to endorse anyone. So having him come out forcefully right off the bat to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris, I think that gave a lot of oxygen for others to do the same. And so that's kind of what we've been hearing so far, is a lot of people in Connecticut and around the country willing to back Harris so far.
Okay, we're going to bring in Bilal Sekou at this point because I think that's a good transition. I think I caught this news at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Had I caught it at 1:45 and then saw Joe Biden's tweet, I think a half hour later, making the endorsement, I don't know if I might have reacted a little differently, I think, which is to ask Bilal, was there a little pause there in that half hour or so between the president making his announcement and then coming out in support of Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I mean,
how were you in real time, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a short pause, and I think it was an important decision that he needed to make. If, this is his vice president, this is someone he picked to be a part of his ticket, who he had a lot of confidence in, to put her on the ticket. And then, of course, she is a heartbeat away from the presidency, and she actually has the experience that no one else who potentially may want the nomination, has. She's actually traveled abroad and spoken on behalf of the country. She's been a heartbeat away from the presidency. She has led on a number of important issues and initiatives on the part of the White House. She has been the official spokesperson. So naturally, she seems to be the person who should be stepping up to be selected as the nominee. Of course, the devil will be in the detail. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done to figure out how exactly this will transpire, if it happens at all, and who may step up to challenge her. But it seems like things are lining up in her favor, that she's being endorsed by some of the important people in the party. But I think the real important question will be, will the money line up? The Democrats have claimed they raised about $49 million since yesterday. That's a lot of money. And of course, they need to raise
on top of $96 million, something like that.
Is it that high now? I saw 49 this morning.
Well, before there was $96 million, I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. So, this is a critical moment, in our country. We've got the, potentially the first woman of color, who would be the nominee, who she picks as a VP, who a VP person will be a very important selection, probably someone who will help her out in those battleground states, which means the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those states are in play. And so this is going to be interesting the next couple of weeks.
Well, you make it the case here that this vice president, Kamala Harris, is very qualified to do the job that she could potentially be elected to do in November, which flies in the face of what Republicans have told me in recent days. So We're going to have to talk about that in a little bit and unpack that as there's this national sort of campaign to discredit the vice president. We'll address that in a little bit. I want to remind folks that you can give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677, streaming live on youtube.com/Connecticut Public, and we're also on the radio as well. So make sure that you get your calls in so that we can have a discussion here. Mark, Bilal, Lisa, unprecedented? Yes, it is unprecedented. In the fact that we've never had somebody come out within, I think, the last 100 days or so before. I think it's 107 days before Election Day, and that's the latest that a candidate has dropped out.
It is, and which is why the party, well, there's a variety of reasons why the party is quickly coalescing around Kamala Harris. As Bilal just said, look, she was Joe Biden's choice to be his vice president. And as State Senator Gary Winfield said to me, he's a prominent member of the Black and Puerto Rican caucus in the General Assembly. He said, look, this is the job she was appointed to or chosen for by Joe Biden to be next in line. And there's really nothing, it would be difficult to do anything, as far as politically, as far as strategically, if the Democratic Party snubs the first woman of color to serve as vice president, if this convention were to snub her as Joe Biden's successor, I think there would be chaos and division. And, I was quickly scanning various news sources this morning, and I was struck by a quote from the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, is quoted in the New York Times. And he basically said, we can unite and win, or we can fight each other over who the nominee is and lose. It's that simple. And I think that is sort of the sense right now, which is why, yes, there is some feelings that it would be good to have an open competition for the sake of the process, as well as to give Vice President Harris a chance to show she has some political chops organizationally and otherwise to win the convention. But to do that is certainly risky. Vinnie Morrow, the New Haven Democratic town chair, I won't quote him on the air, but he said to go to a Chicago with an open convention would be, bleeping chaos. And I think there is a lot of sentiment that way in the Democratic Party right now.
Bilal, Mark used the word snub. It'd be disastrous if they snubbed Vice President Harris, correct?
I absolutely agree. I mean, just the other day, 1,400 Black women signed a letter in which they essentially said they backed Joe Biden. And of course, they also suggested that to jump over Kamala Harris to be, the nominee if Joe Biden were to pull out would just be ludicrous. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, the Democratic Party succeeds or fails without, with or without the votes of people of color, especially African Americans. When you think about some of those states, let's take, for example, Pennsylvania. You need record turnout in both Pittsburgh as well as Philadelphia if you're going to win that state, record turnout from Black voters. If Democrats are not able to, get that turnout in places like Detroit and Wayne County, or to get that turnout in Atlanta, then this thing, is a runaway for Donald Trump. I mean, it's not a lot of states that, are really up in the air. And so for Democrats to win this thing, to actually come out and say, we have no confidence in the first woman of color to be selected nominee, to be selected as the vice president, and now potentially the nominee who will, go forward with the party, and represent the party as a presidential nominee is just, it's insane. It would be suicide for the political party to jump over her. The question really becomes, who is the VP? Who is the second person who brings enough strength to the ticket that it will even, deepen their sort of ability to bring out the vote and succeed, especially in those battleground states. And I think that's the real question Democrats need to be trying to figure out.
So let's go to that. Let's try to answer that. Or I'm not going to say that Lisa's going to be able to answer that, because I don't know if anybody can answer that at this point. But at least who could potentially step up and challenge Kamala Harris if it were open? I don't know if we've seen anybody do that yet, or who could potentially be a vice presidential candidate that we might be hearing around the Capitol, as we have our federal policy reporter here to help us out with that. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, in terms of challenging her, I mean, we haven't seen anyone really step forward yet. I mean, all the people that have been rumored to be potential nominees and who are also rumored to be potential running mates for Harris, they're all lining up behind her. That's Governor Gavin Newsom in California. I'm pretty sure Governor Whitmer in Michigan as well. Andy Beshear in Kentucky. These are all, a lot of governors are being looked at currently as potential running mate potential for Kamala Harris. And so I think watching them fall in line behind her then really turns the focus to who might run on a ticket with her. In terms of who might challenge her, again, basically we've seen Senator Joe Manchin sort of float a trial balloon as a potential. He's a Democrat from West Virginia who became an independent and who has really complicated the legislative agenda for Biden and Harris in Congress. And so we're starting to see him look at the potential of it. But again, we're watching everyone at this point pretty much fall in line for Kamala Harris. So I think the potential of who becomes a running mate is really the next story. And I think it's exactly as Bilal said, it's going to be a focus on those who serve in battleground states. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think a lot of those governors and lawmakers in those states could be potentially tapped to run with her.
Anyone who thinks they have a future in Democratic presidential politics is really unlikely to jump in and challenge Kamala Harris. You would be damaged goods among significant constituencies in the party. Women, people of color, women in general and black women as well tend to vote in greater numbers, in greater percentage than males do, which is why we always hear about the gender gap and who is benefiting from the gender gap. So, I will really be surprised if there's a serious challenge to her. And it's also the practicalities. You have to quickly hustle to round up signatures from hundreds of delegates to get before the convention. There will be, a floor operation to sort of discourage that. So right now, it just seems that people are just saying, for a whole variety of reasons, this is the way to go to back Kamala Harris.
And there's just 100 days or so to go. Lisa, just help me understand here. At least we don't necessarily know the names or anything like that, but let's talk about the why this happened and why it happened this weekend. There was a thought that President Biden might be digging in or something like that because of just, I imagine, the sheer shock of having a lot of people that have supported you up until this point say that you're no longer fit to run for president or reelection. So why did this happen this weekend? Why did it happen 2:00 on a Sunday? Do we have any insight into that?
I don't know necessarily why it came on a Sunday. Again, I think we were all wishing it would happen at normal business hours. But as we're all talking about, there's a convention in about a month in Chicago. They're going to have to name a nominee. The clock was ticking, as Senator Murphy said. They needed to make a decision. And so, for the last few weeks, it was really called into question whether Biden was going to step aside. He had been resisting calls. He seemed like he was digging in. This is a man and a president who's been running, who has sought the presidency since the 80s. This has been a dream and a goal for him. And he finally got there in 2020. So I imagine that was a really difficult thing to grapple with and to step aside, especially when you've seen pretty major legislation come through your administration. And so I imagine that was a decision he did not take lightly. But again, the convention being in a month, once you got past the convention and someone formally accepts the nomination, then it would seemingly be next to impossible to get someone off the ballot and off the ticket. So they needed to make a decision fast. We saw that this weekend. And so now we have basically about a month to see how this shakes out. If it's just Vice President Harris, as we all said, we expect that she will continue to collect support and be basically the unifying candidate. And whether they rally behind her and they do that virtual roll call that they've been talking about, I don't think so. I think we will see an actual nomination process play out in Chicago in mid-August. And as of right now, it's looking pretty good for Vice President Harris.
Bilal, speak to the fact that we have there that Joe Biden, who was normally pretty defiant, had to just step out at this point. And then why it's important to have this happen now, because I would imagine soon that mail-in ballots are going to go out in a matter of days.
Yeah, I'm still myself trying to process just all of the sort of machinations and procedures for how the Democratic Party will make that final decision about who the nominee is. I know there are also some issues of getting the Democratic candidate's name on the ballot in some states. And so there are a lot of, complicated issues, I think, at play right now. I actually, a couple of weeks ago, thought to myself that this week would likely be the week he would have to make that decision. I think when Nancy Pelosi and others in the top tier of the party, raised some questions about whether he should continue, while not calling for him to leave, but at least leaving that open and saying the president needed to make a decision really quickly. But I think also the other thing that happened is that funders started to pull out. And, so if you ask me, I mean, certainly, when we look back, and history will look back at Joe Biden, I think he's been one of the most successful presidents we've ever had. He came in at a critical moment in our nation's history. And as Mark said at the very beginning, we're still grappling with illiberalism that's growing in our country, an embrace of authoritarianism, that's much more widespread than we should all be comfortable with, some other kinds of challenges with regard to our economy. And so Joe Biden was the right person at the right time to sort of calm, the waters. What I'm happy about, is that, him leaving the stage, certainly means that there, now is an opportunity for younger, people, a more diverse group of people to step up to the plate. Certainly if Donald Trump is elected, he will be the oldest president ever, elected. And so we haven't sort of gotten completely out of the gerontocracy that we are in. But at the same time, I think, this creates a new opportunity with him stepping aside. My hope is that at the convention, they will, give him the kind of tribute that he really deserves, because he came at a very critical moment, in our country.
Go ahead, Mark. You were going to say something.
Well, first off, I don't think ballots are going out anytime soon.
I think it's in September, right? Or
yeah,
at least
right.
Sorry,
but it's
That's
after
like 30 days from now, or 35 days from now,
okay.
Right? I don't know.
Right. You need
the summer ends.
You
quick,
need the nomination set before the ballots go out. So that is time, and there is some grumbling, and there's some threats by Republicans. Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, questioned whether they could somehow challenge Kamala Harris's place on the ballot. I think most lawyers would say that would be frivolous, because there's going to be there is a vacancy in the Democratic nomination under the Democratic Party rules. She or whomever will be the duly nominated candidate. So the idea that a major party nominee will be denied access in any of the 50 states seems to be pretty far-fetched.
I want to dig into that a little bit. I really do, because I think I think anything's kind of possible now. Or at least there's a paranoia after you saw what happened with Judge Eileen Cannon last week in Florida. So at least I don't want to say anything that's speculation or fear-mongering, but you could understand that people are concerned about the courts. In fact, we sent a survey out around the election, which you could fill out at ctpublic.org/election. And a lot of people that are responding to the surveys, I thought we were going to get a couple of responses. We've had hundreds of responses, thank the Lord. But some of these responses, a lot of them are about the Supreme Court. So at least there's fear right now that there could be a challenge. We got to dig into that a little bit. But Lisa, before the weekend, most of Connecticut's congressional delegation stood behind Joe Biden. I talked about this with Dan Haar last week. But now, are we going to start to hear from members of these delegation, from the delegation? And what have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, they all, as we expected, and what a lot of other Democrats are doing in the country, they're praising him. They're grateful for what he's been able to do for the past 3.5 years. I mean, especially Senator Murphy, he worked really closely with President Biden on the gun safety bill. They all played a role in passing infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act. So, I mean, we've heard the effusive praise for Biden and for kind of describing what he did as a selfless act. But as we said, they're all largely rallying around Vice President Harris. They're all largely getting behind her. Some some have held out, but it's not that anyone's uninterested in her candidacy. They're just kind of waiting to see it play out. They maybe want to see an open convention, but I think everyone is pretty happy with Vice President Harris taking the helm of this. And so, I mean, but look, when this was all playing out over the past 3 weeks and we didn't know what was going to happen with President Biden, only Congressman Jim Himes was willing to publicly say, hey, I think he should drop out of the race. Everyone else was kind of giving muted praise of the president. And so I think they got to basically benefit from time, just kind of sitting and waiting, not having to say whether or not they wanted him to drop out. And then they kind of were just able to wait it out. And basically now we saw President Biden drop out of the race. They didn't have to make a public statement. And so a lot of them just kind of had to kind of wait and see. And now they're all kind of rallying behind both Biden and Harris.
I'm developing a deep friendship with Lisa Hagen and Mark Pazniokas here over the last couple of years. And we obviously have a deep relationship, Connecticut Public, with the CT Mirror, as you can tell by having a CT Mirror and Connecticut Public joint federal policy reporter in Lisa Hagen. But Lisa and Mark work together to cover the convention. That's why I said all that, the convention. And they'll be working together, I understand it, to cover the Democratic National Convention. So please do go to ctmirror.org. Do I have the website correct? ctmirror.org.
Yes.
To follow that coverage. Bilal, I love you too. I'm just making a plug for their coverage. I just wanted to make sure
I'm trying to figure out where the love is at here.
Yeah.
You know,
you get all the love, even though you
Frankie,
talk a lot of trash about UConn sports here. But we only have about a couple of seconds here before we go to the break. 888-720-9677 if you'd like to call in. But I make that transition because I know that Lisa and Mark have been trying to talk to the governor, and Mark has had reaction from the governor.
Yes, I spoke to the governor very shortly after the announcement came out. He's laying back for the moment, but I don't think it's because he is going to withhold his support. And Attorney General Tong said to me, he said, look, a lot of Democrats are going to view this as Joe Biden's day, and they're going to give him some respect and some space. So the governor didn't say anything to me to indicate that he is going to go against the tide and oppose Kamala Harris. That I don't believe that was the source of his reticence to make an official endorsement yesterday. But
people were relatively quiet except for Himes and the governor. I mean, the governor did, yeah.
The governor did what the governor does. He sometimes does not speak as directly as a reporter I would like, and perhaps his staff would like at times. But he embraced Himes. That's how he sort of did it. And what was going on, and what I am aware, that behind the scenes, Governor Lamont was one of the Democrats who was more direct with Joe Biden. He did have conversations directly with the president, and he did share his concerns about the president's ability to win and again to serve the full second term. And that was his approach. And, you saw that with, Bilal mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi made sure that the question of would Biden step down would remain in play, because at a key point she said, well, we're still having a conversation and it's up to him. And that was after Joe Biden said, no, it's over. I've made my decision. I'm staying in. So you had that two track, and Lamont was on the inside track, the people who were trying to coax the president, as opposed to the outside track of the people who were trying to demonstrate to the president that there was significant concern in the party. And those two threads came together Sunday afternoon.
Mark, let's hear from somebody who has been very supportive of the president, even to this point. Representative Rosa DeLauro, here's what she said on Sunday to our Michaela Savitt. Thank you so much for getting the following clip.
I think she is extremely capable doing the job, and I think there is great excitement around a candidacy in many respects. That's what many people were looking for.
Any other remarkable testimony, Lisa, before we go to break here, that you heard from Democrats in Connecticut?
No, I mean, I think they largely hew to what Rosa DeLauro was saying. I think they're all pretty excited to rally around Vice President Harris, those that formally endorsed her. But, aside from President Biden's age, I mean, prior to the debate, I mean, there was already concern about whether he was going to have an enthusiasm gap if he was as popular as he once was. I mean, there was already polling to indicate that. And so I think Democrats are eager to have a candidate that maybe can rally more voters, bring in a larger coalition of voters. And so I think that'll be interesting to see as we play out the next few months.
We talked about Democrat reaction. Let's talk about Republican reaction in Connecticut and beyond after this break. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. Want to remind folks, 888-720-9677. That's the number to call to get on the air and have this great powerhouse panel answer your questions and maybe make you feel better about democracy today. 888-720-9677. Watch the show live right now. We're streaming on YouTube, youtube.com/Connecticut Public. You're listening to The Wheelhouse.
Support comes from Connecticut Magazine. The July issue highlights all the best of Connecticut as voted by readers, plus the story of Connecticut's last lobsterman and beach reads by Connecticut authors. On newsstands and online at ConnecticutMag.com.
I'm Jen White.
And I'm Todd Zwillick.
As this year's election campaign moves into full gear, join us every Monday.
We're leaving the horse race and the polls to the side. Instead, our focus is on the stakes of this election for you, for the country, and for our democracy.
Others will argue the odds, but elections are too important to be treated as a game. Join us for our weekly series, If You Can Keep It. That's next time on 1A.
Coming up this morning at 11.
Hi, I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, host of On Point from WBUR. Every day, On Point tries to help make sense of our world. We'll learn together, challenge our thinking, we'll meet some amazing people, and hopefully we'll have some fun too.
Listen this morning at 10.
Support comes from Middlesex Health's Center for Spine Surgery, bringing the most advanced robot-assisted, minimally invasive surgical techniques to those suffering with back pain, difficulty walking, and numbness, plus customized treatment plans. middlesexhealth.org/spine.
Special edition of The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. This hour, we're talking about this weekend's shakeup within the Democratic Party. President Joe Biden now stepping aside. Who's going to step in? What are their odds at winning the election? It kind of sounds like Kamala Harris might have a clearer track than we thought. But there is some controversy around the vice president, much because many Americans can't help but use misogynist and racist rhetoric when we have a woman who is ascending, as we are right now, including the Republican chair, the chair of the Connecticut Republican Party, who was on the Wheelhouse last week. Here's what Ben Proto said when I asked him about Kamala Harris.
No one really thinks that having a president who giggles when asked a question because she doesn't have an answer to it is really the kind of person we need leading the country or the world. Look, Kamala Harris was chosen for a reason, and it had absolutely nothing to do with her ability to be the next president of the United States, to be the vice president of the United States. It was clearly gender and racial politics that were put in play by the Democrats. And as a result, they have a person sitting a heartbeat away from the presidency who really is not capable of serving in that role.
And on the show, Bilal, after that was said, we had somebody named Jason Stanley, who is a philosopher, researcher at the University of Yale. He says that saying something like that, infantilizing Kamala Harris by saying that she giggles, is a way to essentially say that black people and women are incompetent and can't do the job. What are your thoughts, Bilal, on at least the rhetoric there?
That's almost like a loaded question to ask. I mean,
I threw a whole bunch at you there. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I mean, it's very clear, and I've been clear in any opportunity I've had to talk publicly about Donald Trump that I think he is a racist. I think he is someone who is very sexist, and this record goes back many, many years. And I think within the Republican Party, a lot of people have talked about the role that Christian nationalism and white supremacy is playing, in the Republican Party right now and how it plays out. And Donald Trump certainly has been someone, if you go back to Charlottesville, and his reaction to what happened, that there were good people on both sides, when we literally had people marching down the streets, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and "blood and soil," and to say that there were some good people on that side, with those kind of anti-Semitic tropes or, racist claims against, Black people, so it speaks for itself. I mean, I think, this will be interesting over the next, month or, couple months, until the actual election day. One of the things that really irritates a lot of people, especially Black people, is the way Republicans will say Kamala Harris's name wrong by calling her Kamala. And Donald Trump says that, and other people in the Republican Party say that, and that is, that's very intentional. That's not a mistake to do those kind of things. And so to hear something that puts down this very accomplished woman who served in the U.S. Senate, was the Attorney General for the state of California, who served as the sort of lead prosecutor in San Francisco, has been the vice president for the last 4 years, to put her down in that way, I think, says more about the speaker than it says about the person who's being spoken about.
It's a part of this national campaign, as Jason Stanley told Connecticut Public last week, to discredit people of color and women. And it's kind of like this national crusade against DEI is what he's saying that this is. Mark, just quickly here, because we have to go to break because we're going to have the senator on. Any other Republican reaction? We've featured a lot of the Democrats. Are you hearing from other leading Republicans in the state, even nationally here, reacting to the news that we're going to have a new candidate on the Democrat side?
Sure. The House Minority Leader in the General Assembly, Vince Candelora, put out a statement yesterday playing on one of the several Republican themes, which is the Democrats had basically covered up the condition of the president. And then the question is, does this undermine the will of Democratic primary voters? But I think we're going to quickly move past that. There will be a furious effort by the Republicans to define Kamala Harris, who is currently underwater when it comes to her approval rating. But there's an opportunity on the Democratic side now to capitalize on the excitement that you're going to see in some key elements of the Democratic coalition. But that's what's going to be happening furiously. And Connecticut, of course, is not in play. Donald Trump lost Connecticut by 20 points 4 years ago, and 14 points 4 years prior to that. So the question is really nationally, how is this going to play and how will it affect down ballot?
Connecticut's not in play, but I thought about you. I think about you all the time, Mark. But I thought about you at this point.
It's an alarming thought.
And this is why I really wanted Ben Proto on the show last week, because I know that Connecticut's not necessarily in play, but you said something about Ryan Fazio that has echoed in my brain for a long time, where you said that he might be somebody who might be hurt by Trump being on the ballot, or at least might be a bit impacted, because we talk about how that can drive people to the polls, right? So my only thought was that Jim Himes, I'm wondering as a journalist, is Jim Himes saying something at this point because maybe Fairfield County is starting to go a different way because of what's happening in the nation? Can you just help me understand that?
Well,
was maybe Connecticut's not necessarily in play, but this blue tide that we've seen in Fairfield County, do you think that was in jeopardy of changing throughout this whole controversy around Biden's age?
I think at the margins, yes. Ryan Fazio is a young state senator, one of only 12 Republicans in the 36-seat Senate, and so his is one of the races I'll be looking at closely over the course of the next few months. But to Ben Proto's comments, I mean, yes, that does feed into messaging that we're going to hear from the Republicans. Now, I will say, to offer the analysis that race and gender played a role in her selection, that is something that Joe Biden himself would acknowledge. But that's not what he said. It's how he expressed that opinion, and demeaning to a woman about, do you want a president who giggles? And that's the kind of thing that is misogynist and plays into that. As opposed to the hard political analysis of, yes, look, race, gender, and other things are elements of how people make decisions about putting together tickets and at times how they vote. But you can do that separately from, again, making comments that are sexist and whatnot.
And this is true. I mean, you're reaching out to black people, to women of color. That's part of it. Obviously, the other part is that Kamala Harris is very qualified. But as you're trying to say, there's strategy in everything. There's strategy to why they would pick a J.D. Vance or something like that. I'm cutting myself off because I understand now. Oh, Bilal, can you make that quick point? Yes, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say what's really important here is that these are questions being raised about ability. Yes. You know, the use of race or, gender, just like the use of J.D. Vance coming from a battleground state and someone who comes from a poor working class white background was very strategic as well. But it's different when you make the leap to when you raise questions about someone's capability and their, or their ability, which is what I think is ultimately what that comment was about.
Senator Richard Blumenthal joins us on the phone right now. That's why I wanted to jump in and kind of get involved here. Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you for joining us on rather short notice during quite the transition here in the nation. How are you this morning?
I am well. Quite the transition indeed, but I'm really delighted to be here in Connecticut this morning and all day yesterday hearing from people around the state as I traveled from Brookfield to Norwalk to New Haven to Seymour. Just a real sense of excitement as well as relief, but gratitude to Joe Biden for making this historic decision.
What's it been like for the last couple of weeks for you, Senator? You have to be respectful to the president, obviously, and have you come out and tried to get here and get behind former Senator Harris, the vice president? Have you tried to come out and support Vice President Harris?
I'm endorsing her today. I thought yesterday was really a day to honor Joe Biden and give him the respect and reverence even that he deserves, because he's been such a extraordinarily courageous and consequential leader when you think about how he brought us out of the COVID crisis, a major public health challenge, and then the economic crisis that COVID precipitated, his impact on really historic legislation. I worked on the PAC Act, which provides care and benefits to veterans who are exposed to toxic substances on the battlefield, like burn pits, and of course, cuts in prescription drug prices and in inflation. Generally, the rebuilding roads and bridges that we're seeing here in Connecticut, we're announcing today, as a matter of fact, a geothermal project for Union Station in New Haven with Governor Lamont, with federal money coming from one of those programs that President Biden initiated. So a really hugely impactful presidential leadership. And I'm going to be endorsing Kamala Harris because I think she'll carry on that legacy with new vitality and energy.
And how are you feeling about her candidacy?
I feel great. Real excitement, exuberance. She brings an energy and vitality to this job. I know her from my work with her on the Judiciary Committee in the United States Senate. We work closely together on criminal justice reform as well as on the Supreme Court nominees. I admire her as a former attorney general, as I was, and followed her work closely there, and literally sat next to her on the floor of the United States Senate for the time that she was there. We sat side by side during the impeachment trial. So I've really gotten to know her and her family, and I have boundless respect and admiration for her.
Do you think that anybody is going to come out and challenge Vice President Harris? I don't want to necessarily have you make predictions, but could you at least help me understand if there's going to be unity around this, or is this going to be a potential vulnerability for Democrats leading up to November, or at least to the convention, where we might see another candidate come forward? What are your thoughts?
Great question, because I think unity is the goal. Whether it's right away or during the convention or afterward, we need unity, and we will have it. I'm sensing that the excitement and energy that Joe Biden has, in effect, unleashed through this decision and his endorsement of Kamala Harris are going to bring us together as a party, as Democrats, but also I think as a country, because we have so much in common in trying to bring the country together. So I think we will have unity. I don't know whether there'll be another candidate for president on the Democratic side. There's a lot of coalescing around her and a lot of eagerness to find out who she prefers for vice president. But we also have a very deep bench there, and I think it's a tribute to the governors and some of my colleagues in the Senate, like Mark Kelly, who have demonstrated real leadership.
Senator, I want to know if anything stood out to you in watching the Republican National Convention, or at least hearing some of the things that came out of it, and whether or not you were able to make it through that hour and a half speech from Donald Trump. I'm hearing on a lot of podcasts that people weren't able to, but what were your thoughts about the convention overall?
I have to confess I was unable to make it through the entire 90 minutes. I listened to the beginning when former President Trump recounted the assassination attempt, which I found really gripping, to hear his account of it. And then he kind of diverged back to, the standard Trump, whatever you want to call it, rally speech. And it wasn't even the rally speech, so far as I could gather. So I have to admit that I tuned out partway through. But certainly there's a clear contrast here between a candidate, Kamala Harris, who has spent her entire career fighting and working for the little guy, the everyday American, and Joe Biden, who put the country first, which Donald Trump has never done. There's a clear contrast on issues, fighting for reproductive rights and women's health care, gun violence prevention, veterans issues where the president and Kamala Harris have stepped forward. Yeah. There's a real legacy for Kamala Harris to carry forward.
Are you concerned at how Republicans may come after her, particularly how we've talked about this today, as we've already heard a leading Republican in Connecticut talking about Kamala Harris giggling and the misogynistic and racial undertones in some of these comments that folks are making?
We're already seeing some of the misogynistic and, frankly, racist overtones, not even undertones, yes, in what Republicans are saying, which I think is really unfortunate for the country. Politically, very unwise, but just shameful and disgraceful. So I hope that this race to the bottom on the Republican side will be avoided.
Last question I want to ask you, because I think it's something that many Americans are thinking about right now. I mentioned a poll that we've been doing, a survey that we've been doing at Connecticut Public. A lot of people responding and asking about the U.S. Supreme Court. Is there any concern that the Supreme Court is going to loom over this process, or at least maybe a lawsuit over how Biden's delegates get pledged, or if it's more fuel to the fire if Vice President Harris is able to beat Donald Trump in November?
There's no predicting what this United States Supreme Court could or would do. They have plainly demonstrated that they are acting more out of political motives in many of these cases than legal doctrine. The decision in the Dobbs case and some of the gun violence prevention measure cases are really an abrogation of precedent and long-established constitutional doctrine. So there really is no knowing.
Or at least is there, Senator, the last question here, because we only got a few seconds left here, but is there at least something that Democrats are doing nationally to try to avoid this, to avoid a challenge? Is there anything you're seeing that is being done to try to avoid a kind of a challenge?
Following the law. There's no legal basis for any challenge to President Biden releasing his delegates in accordance with both state law and the convention party rules, and there is no basis for challenging Kamala Harris being designated instead of Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. And the resort to the courts, I think, should be very quickly struck down by the courts. It's a political question. There's a political question doctrine that has guided the Supreme Court over centuries of the American Republic, which is that politics ought to be decided in the political sphere. Courts shouldn't be acting as politicians in robes, and that constitutional doctrine ought to clearly guide the result here.
Important testimony from a former state attorney general in Richard Blumenthal, the senator representing Connecticut, as we also saw that Kamala Harris was an attorney general in the state of California. So I appreciate this context. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Senator.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Next few months are sure to be eventful, and we're here to talk you through it all. Hey, who knows? Maybe we'll pop up with another one of these live streams. YouTube.com/Connecticut Public. We are so appreciative of the team here at the Wheelhouse in Connecticut Public jumping on this and helping us do a live stream and, of course, come to you on the radio on a Monday here on a special edition of the Wheelhouse. It was produced by Chloe Wynn, Robin Doyen-Aiken, and Meg Dalton. Thank you so much to Meg and Katie Tolarski for editing this show. Technical producer Gene Amatruda. Thank you to Bradley O'Connor for helping us in studio, as well as Joe Koss, Julianne Verace, and Sam Hockaday on graphics. And thank you to our visuals and social media teams as well. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. A hearty thank you to Mark Pasniokis, Lisa Hagen, and Bilal Siku. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.